Hello, and welcome to this mini podcast series, When Relationships Go Wrong, with Hoot Singles and LICC. My name is Hattie Webb. I'm the founder of Hoot Singles, my much-loved side hustle where I run Christian singles nights to enable singles to meet, mingle and have fun. And I'm joined by the lovely Sophie Sanders, who is the marketing and communications lead at LICC. I've had the joy of getting to know her through this collaboration, and she's honestly amazing. Her friends call her the Christian Bridget Jones, and she's currently, very excitingly, writing a book about relationships, which you'll get a little taster of in this 4-part blog series Sophie has written alongside this podcast, covering the challenges of singleness and dating. They're only short, so we're looking forward to chatting them through in a bit more depth. So go and check out the blog post on the LICC website, but don't worry if you don't manage to read any of them, you can still listen and follow along. I know so many of you are going to feel deeply encouraged and seen by Sophie's story and vulnerability. Thank you so much for joining me, Sophie, and without further ado, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to part 4 of When Relationships Go Wrong with Hoot Singles and LICC. This is the last episode of our 4-part mini podcast series, and this episode is all about the unhappily married. Now, Sophie, neither of us are married, so we can't speak to this from experience. However, we can both speak to, as we've spoken about in previous episodes, dreaming of marriage and actually probably in some seasons idolising it maybe a little bit too much. And also balancing that with seeing marriages really struggle and actually break down all around us. At the church I grew up in, for example, literally all of my parents' Christian friends were divorced by the time I went to uni, including the vicar and his wife. And I remember leaving home, going to university thinking, what is this Christian marriage thing all about? It seems no different to non-Christian marriages that are out there. And actually, the reality is that Christians are included in the 50% divorce rate stat. So what should we do? Give up on marriage and our romantic dreams? And the Bible verse we're focusing on today, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9, says, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. So how does this verse and actually rest of the Bible that mentions and speaks about marriage, how do they bring us hope for marriage?
Oh, such a good question. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot recently, seeing quite a few marriages break down around me, or at least go through relatively rocky patches. And something that I've noticed in common about those marriages across different kind of groups and sectors of my life is that they tend to have this scoreboard mentality. So husband says, I've done X, so wife says, I've done Y. And therefore there's almost this standoff about kind of where do you go next? But actually the biblical picture isn't man versus woman, husband versus wife. The biblical picture is 2 becoming one. It's 2 people becoming one flesh. And it's 2 people committing to be with one another in covenant relationship for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, to love and cherish until death do us part. And I think what this passage really beautifully kind of brings to light again on that is that the idea that you're bound together, 2 people bound together are stronger. And so instead of kind of, how can I put my spouse down? How can I be the one that has the lion this weekend? What about if it was like, how can I lift my spouse up? How can I make them more of who God created them to be? How can I help them flourish? How can I sacrificially love them this week? What if it was less about me and more about them? What if we saw each other as a team rather than 2 opposing sides? And I think that is God's picture for marriage. And I think in marriages where you see that worked out, albeit imperfectly, because we are imperfect people, you see marriages that are growing stronger and that are growing closer to Jesus. And I think, we further on in that passage, it talks about the 3rd strand.
Yeah.
And 2 people working closely together. And you can see this in marriages of non-Christians can be really strong. But actually, when you add that 3rd chord of God in that relationship, it can become unbreakable. And I think that is where, as we see a pretty bleak landscape for marriage, as Christians, we need to reorientate ourselves to remember that ultimately marriage is a picture of a covenantal union between Christ and his church. And that is not one that is broken.
Yeah. And that is actually ultimately a symbol, a picture of the gospel itself. It symbolises God, the bridegroom, and his bride, the church, ultimately. And it's so easy to forget that. But actually, I found the title for this episode that you chose so interesting, The Unhappily Married, because I intimated earlier that I kind of went very much back to the drawing board after my breakup. And I really thought to myself, what is marriage? What is Christian marriage? Why do I want it? Why is it something that's been placed on my heart? And I think through researching and praying, I started to realise that actually marriage isn't about being happy. And I know that sounds really strange. And it's interesting that you called it The Unhappily Married, because actually the reality is marriage isn't going to always make us happy. And maybe that's what marriage isn't what it's about. And actually maybe that's why in our society now we're struggling with marriage, because maybe couples get to the point, and I've experienced this in a long-term relationship, where you're like, you're not making me very happy anymore. Like, the feelings aren't there. Like, the feelings that I had at the beginning, they're not there, and I don't feel happy anymore. And that can be such a struggle. But actually, you know, that's not ultimately what marriage is for. And it's not to say that I think people should be unhappy in marriages, but actually it's like you said, maybe we should be reframing it to be something that's about our holiness.
And I think the church sometimes can create really unhelpful narratives around this. I think Christian couples can either feel really pressured to get married quickly because that is the quote unquote right way to do it. That actually you should date for X number of months and then be engaged for Y number of months and then be married. Or it's seen as kind of almost this point that we're all working towards, and that once you reach that, you're going to be happy. That is where happiness is found. And it kind of seems funny to bring Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, into a Christian podcast. But I was really struck when I went to see the film back in 2023 that throughout the film, all of the teenage girls are longing for their periods to come. I mean, they are doing everything they can in their power, which has no scientific basis, to bring them about. And at the end of the film, the final cut is Margaret. She's sitting on the loo. Her period started and she's crying. It's not all it was cracked up to be.
We can all remember that moment.
But I sometimes wonder if actually Christians experience that a little bit in marriage. You know, they're so excited, they're doing everything they can to get married, and they picture it to be this time where it's just blissful, and they, I don't know, gallop through fields of gold, barley, I don't know, whatever that kind of film metaphor is. And actually they get there and you've still got to do the dishwasher and you've still got to go to work.
And the mundane.
You've got to do the mundane, and it's not all it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is it's because it's what we think marriage isn't what it is.
Yeah.
Actually, marriage isn't taking away all of those practical parts of our lives. It's committing to do those parts of our lives with someone else. And to do that in a way that to the world that's watching reflects Christ and his love that's unconditional, that's sacrificial. And sometimes I just think maybe in church, if we were a little bit more honest and we open up conversations that you can go through like patches of your marriage where you don't feel as happy, but it doesn't mean that your marriage is over. Actually, you know, there could be so many reasons why you're unhappy. You know, maybe you're facing infertility struggles, financial struggles, health struggles, communication struggles, all sorts of other struggles. And those are things that are not making you feel happy in the moment. In fact, they can be really, really sad and hard things that you're rightly grieving, potentially. But actually saying to those couples that doesn't make your marriage any worse than the couple sitting next to you in church. Actually, any couple that's been married for any period of time will be able to tell you they went through really hard seasons. And obviously, we spoke in the previous episode about abuse, and if that's why you're unhappily married, I think
that's a
completely different story.
Yeah. And we should have said that at the beginning.
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about kind of things where maybe marriage isn't all you thought it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
And we're talking about where your expectation isn't matching your reality.
Yeah.
And so if that's you, take real heart, because actually it's through those seasons that God can grow you closer to your spouse and he can grow you closer to himself. And actually, as you model that to younger singles in the church, that's a really helpful thing for singles. I say this as a single myself. Yeah. When my friends who are married are honest and raw and authentic and real with me, that being married isn't always perfect, it makes me far more content in my singleness.
Yeah.
Because it's not airbrushed.
Yeah.
And I realise that just like it's not perfect being single, it's not perfect being married.
Yeah.
And that's not the catch-all solution to my woes and my worries.
Yeah. And I think that's the crux, isn't it? There are pros and cons of singleness. There are pros and cons of marriage. They're different pros and cons, but they're actually equal in weighting. Your life does not begin, or your life is not solved once you get married. And also, your potential future spouse is not your saviour. They are not going to fix everything. They're not going to fix your problems. And actually, I've heard people talk about marriage as being actually a mirror, or you said a magnifying glass, that actually any problems that you do have, they're only going to be exemplified in marriage. So actually, that's why I care so much about using my past singleness and encouraging other people in their singleness to not use it as a waiting room where they're just waiting for the day when they get married, but actually to invest, work on themselves, grow, invest in their existing relationships, as we've already said. And actually, I think that leads to probably a much healthier marriage, because then you're not relying on the other person for your ultimate happiness. You're not relying on them to save you. And that's what's beautiful about a Christian, godly marriage, is that actually you're both relying on Jesus as your ultimate saviour, and you're both leading each other towards Jesus in that way. And I actually think it takes a lot of the pressure off, and there's actually then a lot of, I can imagine, freedom within a relationship when you're both being led by Jesus.
Absolutely. And I think also recognising that when you're married, that is an exclusive relationship, but you're called to have relationships with other people too, to still have friendships. And so actually your spouse doesn't need to be your all, your everything, your only social contact, your only person that you can confide in or speak to or seek advice from. Yes, they are a huge part of that. But actually, there are parts of your personality that probably are brought out by different friends and different personalities. And actually, we all have we're multifaceted. I like to think of it like light hitting a prism, and that actually different kind of directions and types of light might bring out the different colours in you. And so rejoice in that, let that happen. Don't just be you and your spouse, but what about inviting other friends to join you in that journey, to bring out those conversations, to bring out those different parts of yourselves, invite them into your home. You don't have to exist as an island, particularly in those hard seasons. Let other people in. Be honest about what you're struggling with. Let those people help you practically. Let them pray for you. Let them walk alongside you. Let them share their wisdom and point you to God's wisdom. Actually, marriages are meant to exist in communities. They're not meant to exist by themselves.
We say it takes a village about having children, but it takes a village with marriage as well. You need that external support. And actually, that's something I've learned in dating as well, especially in the beginning phase of honeymoon phase of a relationship. It can be very, very easy to bubble yourselves, especially when the romance is high and you're infatuated with each other. The tendency to kind of just like isolate and be like, the world, is ours, and or like we're the only ones that are in it, and we just want to be spending all of our time just with each other. The tendency, and that's a beautiful thing, especially when you're in that honeymoon phase, but actually it's so important to resist that temptation and actually from as early on as possible meet each other's friends, invite people into your relationship, ask your friends, your wise counsel around you. If you have a mentor or whoever it might be, ask them, what do you think of this person that I'm with? How do you think I am with this person? And it's hard sometimes to ask those questions because you might be a bit fearful of the answer. But I would say definitely be very intentional about who you're inviting into your life and who you're seeking wise guidance from. And just try not to, because I also see that happen in relationships and people kind of shut themselves away from their community. It's easily done, but I think then that can lead to kind of missing things that are going on. People can often see things more clearly who are looking on the outside in. And it's not healthy for a relationship, as you said, and a marriage to be doing it on your own. You need to lean on the support of others. Okay, and again, marriage is a big topic. We could be talking about this for way longer, as we could have done with all of the topics as part of this series, but I'm going to wrap up here with, as always, your question that is on the blog. And this question is, how can actually we support people who are married? Often we can think as singles or people earlier on in a relationship that our married friends are all sorted with life. They don't need as much support, but that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, and because I'm not married, I didn't feel I was best placed to answer this question. So I did a little bit of field research and I asked my married friends, how can I best support you? How have you felt most supported? And they gave up with some really good answers. So I'll just share a few of those. One friend said to me, please keep asking me about my marriage, Sophie. You're my only
Really
friend that ever asks me how it is, how I'm going, how we're communicating, how our sex lives are. That sounds a bit juicy. How our communication is, how we're finding parenthood, how we're finding chores, work, balance, church, family, etc. So ask your married friends how their relationship is going. Another friend said, I love it when I get invited around. She said, as a married couple, sometimes the onus in churches feels that it's on you to invite round because you're married, you're in that next stage. She said,
and you have the hosting space.
You have the hosting space, but she says, sometimes I just want to go and sit on the floor and eat out of a bowl with a spoon in like someone's kind of like house share and just have real conversation and be hosted. So do that. A third friend said to me, I love it, Sophie, when you offer to help me out practically. Sometimes I just feel like I'm spinning so many plates. And the reality is I've got way more disposable time than this friend. So cook them a meal, take it round, bake them a cake, take it round, offer to help with their childcare, offer to help them do some of their chores if they've had a completely manic week. And actually, they'll then feel really, really loved. And that's really important because being married isn't always easy, but you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I'd echo that first point, especially going from single to then getting into a relationship. I love it when people still ask about my relationship and how it's going and the nitty-gritty details as well, that maybe sometimes I won't want to share as much, but I'm actually always really, really grateful when people ask them and give the space to be able to share really openly. So amazing advice that you've got from some married friends there. And with that, we're going to wrap up this series. Appreciate we've covered some really big topics here. There's a lot of depth, a lot of nuance that I'm sure we definitely haven't managed to cover in these short mini episodes, but I hope they've given you as listeners or watchers or readers much food for thought. I really hope and pray that you felt encouraged and you feel hopeful and uplifted in whatever stage you're at in your relationships journey. Thank you so much for being here, Sophie, for sharing your story so vulnerably and openly, and just for your beautiful words. It's such a gift. You're such a gift, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.